Welcome to the Lawyerist Podcast, a series of conversations about law practice. Each week, we talk with legal entrepreneurs and innovators about building a successful law practice in today's challenging and constantly changing legal market. And now, here are your hosts.
Hi, I'm Sam Glover.
And I'm Aaron Street, and this is episode 224 of the Lawyerist Podcast, part of the Legal Talk Network. Today, we are talking with author and former FBI negotiator Chris Voss about negotiation.
Today's podcast is brought to you by AROG, Text Expander, UMA, and Ruby Receptionist. We wouldn't be able to do this show without their support. Stay tuned. We'll tell you more about them later on.
I am super duper excited about this episode.
It was so fun to record.
I listened to the audiobook version of Chris's book, Never Split the Difference, about both kind of general negotiation techniques and his stories about hostage rescue negotiations and things. And it's an amazing book. His methodology is incredible. I'm super excited.
Yeah, for sure.
So last week, we kicked off a month of topics on technology competence and data security. Last week, we focused specifically on technology competence and how to make sure that lawyers are both fulfilling their ethical duties to be technologically competent and practically meeting the needs of clients and their practice by understanding how technology can and should be used in law. Today, I thought it'd be useful to check in on data security as a topic.
We put out a couple years ago, and we've kept it updated, a guide to 4 steps that you can take to go from, let's call it like a D- to a B+ on data security. Our idea was like, what are 4 low-hanging fruit things that every lawyer could do that are easy to do that will get you most of the way to having a reasonably secure law practice?
Yes. So this is not to say how do you become an expert in data security and spy prevention.
Just 4 things
whatnot.
you have to do.
Yep. And they all take 5 or 10 minutes or less and costs nominal amounts of money. We've got a paid guide on the website that you can buy if you want our fairly simple tutorial on how to do these and which products we recommend. But we will just tell you what the answer is. The answer is 4 steps. One is to encrypt every device that you have client and legal data on, whether that's your laptop or your iPad or your iPhone.
And we're not talking about email encryption, which is clunky and hard to do.
And would be outside of the going from a D to a B.
Yep.
Email encryption would be if you're getting hardcore about this. This would be to basically encrypt the hard drives of the devices that you use. On almost all devices that have been released in the last few years, it's a one-click, one-button solution.
Turn on BitLocker on Windows, turn on File Vault on Mac, use a password on your Apple devices, go into your Android settings and turn on encryption. That's it.
Yep. And at that point, your devices are all encrypted. So that's step 1. Step 2 is to use a VPN for all of your Wi-Fi connections. This is especially crucial if you're traveling or using public Wi-Fi at a coffee shop, a hotel, the airport, etc. But it's still good hygiene to even have these things activated in work Wi-Fi settings or other places that are semi-trusted. And a VPN connection, this is distinct from VPN software that lots of kind of big companies, enterprise companies use for remote access purposes. This is basically encrypting your Wi-Fi connections so that other people on the same Wi-Fi network can't see what you're doing on the internet on your device.
I will say as an alternative, it is fine to never use public Wi-Fi and only use your phone as a hotspot. Some people do that, and it's becoming more common as more of us have unlimited data plans. But I do one or the other. Either never connect to public Wi-Fi, meaning coffee shops, airports, hotels, or always use a VPN. And I think it's a good idea to use a VPN anyway.
And good VPN software is not free, but it's fairly cheap and it's super easy to use. A huge caveat here is if you go to an app store and just type in VPN, some of the things you're going to see there are actually the most malicious Chinese apps that are trying to steal your data. And so you need to be a little bit educated in which are the trusted vendors and which aren't.
And we just updated our guide to choosing a VPN. So you're good to go there.
So step 3 is turning on 2-factor authentication for all of your important accounts. So this for sure includes any financial data, any client data, your email, Any of your main accounts should have two-factor authentication turned on, which means that when you log into those things for the first time on a device, it also requires you to prompt a second input of data, which is usually either a text message code or there are some authenticator apps that can give you secondary codes. But the idea here is that in the event that someone had your password because of these rampant password breaches that we hear about in the news, that even with your username and password, they still wouldn't be able to get in unless they also physically had your device.
If you need ideas for what we mean by important, here's what's in my Authenticator app. Both my work and personal Google accounts, my Evernote account, Xero, which is our accounting software, HubSpot, which is our email and marketing software that holds a bunch of user data, our web host, and my Dropbox account. And that's what I have two-factor
presumably all of
your
banking accounts probably send you text messages.
Yep, Wells Fargo uses a text message option, and so do a couple of others. But yeah, so
two-factor authentication is step number 3. And the final step, number 4, is to use secure passwords, preferably with a password manager software.
Yep.
The software part of that is semi-optional if you can convince yourself and us that your strong password solution doesn't require it. But password managers are also easy to use software that make a bunch of things more convenient and harden your passwords to protect you.
Yeah, good passwords are long and contain letters, numbers, and symbols, and the words in the password don't naturally go together, even if they are in a dictionary. So, for example, a pretty good password would be something like unicorn building puke.
With a number.
And yeah, replace the I's with ones or something like that. That phrase is not going to appear in a book most likely, or that a hacker is likely to use to brute force things. And if you are just dead set against not using software because you hate convenience, then another way to do it is, just use the name of the website or the domain name or something at the end of or the beginning or in the middle of that phrase. And then you can use the same password for everything, but only if you actually have a good password as the foundation. Otherwise, use a password manager. It's just easier and more convenient.
And even in that case, one of the things that's really important about good passwords is that, at least for all of your important things, that they all be unique and that you aren't using the same password for multiple important accounts. And so a password system where you have some sort of confusing password plus the name of the site is something that if someone ever saw, could then know to replace Wells Fargo with Google or whatever. And so making sure that your passwords are both hard and unique is the key. And some people have figured out ways to do that without a password manager, but the work involved in having hard to remember unique passwords for all of your accounts is just better solved by password manager software.
It is. And I appreciate on my phone when I need to log into somewhere, it just has the thing where I touch the button and it pops up my password manager and enters it for me. And it was like a 50 randomly generated character password, and I don't even have to worry about it.
So those are our 4 steps for data security.
And now we've got a brief sponsored conversation with Kevin Sloan from Ooma, and then my awesome conversation with Chris.
Hi there, my name's Kevin Sloan. I work for a company called Ooma, and we sell business phone services.
That's OOMA, right?
Correct.
So Ooma is voice over IP based, or VoIP. What is the difference between that and a traditional landline, and what are the advantages of going with VoIP?
Sure. So your traditional phone service is kind of what you probably grew up with. It's where you have your phone, you plug it into the jack on the wall, and you have your phone up and running. So VoIP is voice over IP, so you get all your call through the internet provider, and you don't need to directly plug it into that phone jack on the wall.
Gotcha. So what's the big deal? What's the difference about that, and why is it a good idea?
Technology is always evolving, and it allows you to do cool new things with your phone, where before, like your phone, it plugs into the wall, the phone rings, you answer it, great. VoIP has like dozens and dozens of cool features, technology, software, all this like fun new stuff that makes your business sound really awesome that you can't get through a traditional phone line.
Yeah, you mentioned one to me, which is that I can set mine up, I assume through a nice interface where I can decide that when somebody calls, Ooma is going to pick up right away and start engaging them immediately. So there will be a voice on the line talking to them while it continues ringing in the background and waiting for me to pick up.
Exactly.
Or triggering them to leave a message or something, which is kind of cool. Give me an example. What would that look like?
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest selling points. We call it our virtual receptionist. So a lot of times if you call someone and you hear a greeting or say, hey, thanks for calling Joe's law firm. With the traditional phone line, you're just going to get a ring and a ring. But now with VoIP, you can have a greeting, you can set that, you can log into an interface, and you can have it say whatever you want, and then you can route your calls to wherever you need to go. So you have different lawyers working at your firm. Press 1 to go to Joe, press 2 to go to Bob. You can talk about your hours. You can talk about the different specialties of law you work on. So you can really engage with a client or potential client, give them the information they need about your firm before you even have to talk to them.
That's pretty neat. You mentioned cost savings as well. What are we talking about here? Let's say I'm at a really small firm and I have 5 people. How do I compare what I might spend with the local phone company versus VoIP like Ooma?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think traditional phone lines, most people don't check their phone bill. You kind of set it, forget it. You pay it, auto pay. If we've looked at our competitors like AT&T and Comcast, and those guys charge $40, $50, $60 a month for that basic phone line. So you're looking at 5 times 60, $300 a month. Ooma, we're only $19.95 a month per line. So if you have those 5 users, you're paying $100 a month. So just off the bat, you're saving $200 a month just by switching to VoIP. And that doesn't even include, obviously, all the great benefits you get with the advanced phone features.
And so I was taking a look at your website. And so the people who want cooler looking hardware can get it. And people who want the comfort of traditional looking office hardware can get those kinds of phones too, I saw. So, and it sounds like with the savings, it'd be a wash on the buying new hardware, but you're offering a discount. And so listeners, if you are intrigued, you can go to ooma.com/lawyerist. That's OOMA.com/lawyerist to learn more about Ooma, and you'll get a 70% discount off your hardware if you sign up.
$70 off, but it feels like you're saving 70% off your phone bill because you probably are. Yes, like you said, you need to get some cool new phones, but it'll definitely pay for itself within a couple of months just for how much money you're saving.
Very cool. Thanks so much, Kevin.
Thanks, Sam. I appreciate the time.
I'm Chris Voss. I'm the author of Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as If Your Life Depended on It, and I am the former FBI lead international kidnapping negotiator.
Hi, Chris. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. I just finished your book. I'm really excited to talk to you, but I feel like we would be doing it an injustice if we didn't dig a little bit into your background, which you described very succinctly as being a lead FBI negotiator. You negotiate with kidnappers, with terrorists, right?
Terrorists, kidnappers, in-laws, all the crazies.
And now you do with companies. Is it more stressful or less stressful when nobody's life is on the line?
Yeah, it's amazing. The phrase, your biggest problem is your biggest problem.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks that negotiation at hand is probably the end of the world.
Mm-hmm. But for you, when you are doing the negotiation, is it better or worse now?
Well, it's different. It was a process before. Mm-hmm. Realistically, we used to say we always had the best chance of success, which means not everything turns out rosy. And if you do enough hostage negotiations, things eventually go bad. So stressful. It's not as stressful. It's satisfying in a different way.
Cool. I'm always kind of curious about the nitty gritty of things. And I'm wondering, does hostage negotiation just become a job after a while?
Well, anything depends upon your approach to it can become a job.
Yeah.
It depends. Anybody could be a mercenary. Hostage negotiation is a mercenary and a missionary's occupation. We get to help people. We get to help people out of bad situations. We also get to use the process to get after the bad guys.
So in your book, it's called Never Split the Difference. And at some point in the book, you express that differently as calling bullshit on compromise. And I like the example you use in the book, but I'd like you to explain why compromise is kind of bad, especially because for our listeners, compromise is kind of what every settlement negotiation is all about.
Compromise is lazy. Compromise is people not engaging in the process. Compromise is people talking at each other instead of with each other. If all you ever do is talk at the other side, you're never going to come up with the best possible outcome anyway. So, if you're into compromise, the bad news is, you're a B-grade negotiator at best.
When you use the example of the color of your shoes and you're trying to negotiate with your wife, you could probably explain it better than I can. Remind me.
Well, it's, I think I should wear black shoes. You think I should wear brown shoes. You wear one black and one brown. That's compromise. Mm-hmm. And compromise is, we take part of my answer and part of your answer and we put them together. That just doesn't work. And case after case after case, half of one answer and half of another answer. It's like trying to design a horse and you end up with a giraffe.
Mm-hmm. And I guess you talk about this in the context of hostage negotiations, and obviously, fine, we'll take 2 hostages, you kill the other 2.
Right.
That's not really where you're trying to end up. But I thought I also understood you to be drawing a distinction between sort of haggling, which is coming to a dollar amount, and, the parts of a negotiation that you can't compromise on. And how do you think about the distinction between here's the negotiation that just has to be black or white, and here's the piece where, there's gray area, and if we meet in the middle on a number, that's okay?
Well, what's not gray? I mean, in any given dollar figure, no dollar figure stands alone. There's at least terms of payment. There are always terms around every dollar figure. I used to love to, I taught negotiation. I used to teach in business schools. The book has gotten us so busy as a consulting company that I'm not teaching it anymore. But I was teaching at Georgetown. I was teaching at USC. I taught at Harvard. And, to get people out of this idea that the dollar, you get your price, you get your deal, they'd come in, everybody'd have a name tag. You had to have a name tag. And so I'd say, okay, how much for your name tag? And, and they go, because they thought the name tag was worthless. They could replace it. I don't know what it cost them to replace it, $1 maybe. Mm-hmm. And they'd say $100. And I'd say, okay, fine. Give me your name tag. And they'd give me the name tag. And they'd say, wait, where's my $100? I said, oh, well, we didn't discuss how you were going to get your $100. I tell you what, I'll give you $1 a year. Mm-hmm. And kidnap negotiations in international kidnapping, a kidnapped victim is a commodity. To us, it's a horrific event. To the kidnapper, they're in the commodities business. Now, we had a bargaining system. You mentioned when we talked before the show, the Ackermann system. It's in the book.
Yeah.
I can lure you into the Ackermann system. It's a very systematic. It's a combination of numbers and psychological approaches where I can get my price. And that was just a game to me overseas because I could agree to a kidnapper's ransom demand, full demand immediately. Just try and get the money out of me. I mean, I would kill you on terms. Mm-hmm. I understand if you think that you've got the deal when you negotiate price. Again, you're not a top level negotiator. It's terms make everything. Terms always make everything. So price is almost irrelevant.
And so what it's really about is getting to the. Well, I was about to say getting to yes, but you spend a fair amount of time in your book explaining why that book, the Getting to Yes book, is misleading. It's only part of the solution. And I was forgetting this because this comes at the beginning of the book, but you talk about how the problem with Getting to Yes is that it's based on this idea of logic, that we can all sit down and come up with a win-win solution, and everybody's going to be happy walking away from the table, whereas your approach to negotiation was forged in hostage situations on practicalities and is more based on the idea that nobody's rational.
And which is the case. And if I could digress a little bit to go back to splitting the difference, compromise, because this gets us also into the heart of the problem why compromise is a death spiral. Danny Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in Behavioral Economics in 2002 for something called prospect theory, which Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky came up with. That if we're human, then loss thinks twice as much as an equivalent gain. Losing $5 hurts twice as much as gaining $5. Mm-hmm. That's an irresistible, I'm not thinking of the right word, but immutable. It's a law of human nature. Yeah. You can't get around it. If you're human, loss thinks twice as much as an equivalent gain. And in point of fact, I listened to an interview once where Danny Kahneman said, it's not twice as much, it's actually 5 to 7 times as much. We just lowered the number to 2, Amos and I did, because we wanted fewer arguments from our academic colleagues. Yeah. So it's a given law of human nature, if you will. All right, so let's get back to compromise. I'm going to give in, I'll split the difference, I'll give in by 5. But I'll feel like in order for us to be even, you're going to have to give me back 10, and I'm not going to be happy until I've gotten you back for 10. Now, once I sting you for 10, and now I feel we're even, you got to hit me for 20. So compromise is a guaranteed death spiral. It's a guaranteed bad outcome where it's guaranteed that both sides will be unhappy. Now, a lot of people believe, well, a good negotiation is where both sides are unhappy. These are not the A players. You don't hear Warren Buffett say, a good deal is when both sides are unhappy. You don't hear the people who are truly the top level players globally, the global deal makers. Oprah Winfrey's a global deal maker. Mm-hmm. She's, if you don't envy her success and wish you could negotiate as well as she does, then evidently you're satisfied not having billions of dollars, having come from nothing. Oprah Winfrey doesn't say things like that. So the idea that both sides should be unhappy is a good marriage is when both sides are unhappy, right?
It feels like what you're aiming for is I want to be happy, and I want the other side not to be too unhappy, or I don't care what they think.
No, well, I mean, long term, the only way there's a Goldman Sachs line: greedy, yes, but long term greedy. Mm-hmm. You have to be concerned about how the other side reacts to the deal, otherwise they're going to pay you back. This gets us, and this is why yes is nothing without how. First of all, one-off negotiations don't exist. You don't have a one-off negotiation with the used car dealer because if it's a good car, you're going to go back to that car dealer. Therefore, it's not a one-off. Mm-hmm. If the car was a lemon, you're going to go back to that car dealer. Therefore, it's not a one-off. So one-offs don't really exist. The person.
Yeah, you said not even in hostage negotiation.
Well, interestingly enough, we have repeat customers in hostage negotiation.
I find that idea just tragically amusing.
Yeah, it is entertaining. And that was one of the first things we had to teach hostage negotiators, because a hostage negotiator, your integrity is everything, because you're going to see these guys again. Yeah. If you take hostages and you live, you've been taught that you can take hostages and you will live. And in the United States, you're going to go to jail and you're going to get out, time off for good behavior. And we're going to see the same dysfunctional guy again. So, we got repeat customers.
Yeah, for sure. You start out, or nearly start out, with the idea of listening and empathy as a martial art. And, our profession, but I think probably lots of people who go into deals have this idea that you barge into the room and kind of bully a compromise out of somebody else. And the idea that listening and empathy is, you talk about bringing like 7 people in to listen to the line because not one person can listen at the same time. So like, how do you change your frame of reference to, I'm going to tell you what I need, to really, truly listening, especially to somebody who you may despise?
Well, again, you're going to have to live with the outcome. Mm-hmm. And how am I going to like a terrorist in a negotiation? How am I going to be on their side? How am I going to find common ground? And so me liking the other side is not a necessary element for me to be ridiculously successful. Mm. Now, liking in and of itself is a whole separate dynamic at the same time, because I want to be likable. Right. Because you're more likely to cooperate with me the more likable I am.
Well, and so because you're talking about not empathizing in the sense of trying to sympathize, that's a different step. You're trying to really, really understand how that other person's brain works and how they think and what decisions are motivating them. And because then those are all levers that you can pull on.
Which is pretty much the original definition of empathy.
Yeah, okay.
And Goldman would refer to it, the guy who was credited with coining the term emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman, in his book called Focus, defined it as a very specific sort of empathy. He called it cognitive empathy. And he goes on to say that it's those who are best at cognitive empathy, overall globally, the best practitioners of it, are sociopaths.
So does that mean you're a sociopath? Good negotiators are sociopaths too?
Well, you got to get out your own emotions out of the way, right?
Why so many people to listen?
If you break down the data on how much information there is in any given communication, we listen at roughly the rate of 400 to 600 words per minute. People can talk at a rate of 140 to 160 words per minute. That's why we think we can multitask, because we have excess capacity over the words. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the data, there's roughly 5 times the amount of information coming off in tonality, and that doesn't even take into account body language. So 5 times 140 gets you beyond the 400 to 600 words a minute capacity we have to begin with. That's not even looking at body language.
Right. I think at some point you said like the content of the communication is what, like 15% the words and 55% the tone. And what was the rule?
The ratios there's a variety of ratios that are out there. The ratio that people most often refer to is 7% content, 38% tonality, 55% body language. Gotcha. People have toyed with that ratio People that are very
That sounds
much
way too precise to be real, right?
Well, when you're talking about human nature, you're always talking about soft numbers. But no matter how many times people have tried to change those numbers, they've never been able to change that there's 4 times the amount of information in tone of voice than in the words themselves, 4 to 5 times. So the ratio never really goes away, how much more is in tone of voice, which gets us back to there's more data coming off of a given person at any moment than one person can keep up with.
So does that mean you have one person whose job is to listen to subtext, and one person's job is to watch for body language, and another person's job is to, focus on tone? Or is that how it works?
It could be in a hostage negotiation center, command post, if you will. We'll break it down to, I'll just have somebody that is trying to listen for things that sound negative, or things that sound important. I'll have people listening for how often profanity is used. We'll have people listening for pronouns. We'll have people listening for length of conversation. As the longer a person on the other side talks, it correlates strongly with rapport. If they're more comfortable talking, they'll say more. They'll feel more bonded to us. Some of this is obvious. If we're getting short answers, we haven't got a lot of rapport. So we want to keep track of the duration of each time they open their mouth. You can really slice it and dice it quite a number of ways once you begin to understand what you're listening for.
Is that less necessary in like a professional setting? Do you still bring a team to negotiations between businesses?
Any time that anything's really important, I never negotiate alone. I always have a listener in there with me. One of my favorite stories, and this was when I was teaching at Harvard, we had an attorney who was a deal maker from Europe and they were negotiating a merger between 2 companies. And as they got in the final stages of the negotiation, they brought in all the young associates for the law firm to watch and learn how the big boys do negotiations. So they got a bunch of people in there that are not tasked with saying anything. They're bored, so they start paying attention to the body language of the other side. Now, in one of their away from the table conferences, the youngsters said, "Hey, we don't know if it means anything, but every time this one particular deal point comes up, somebody on the other side starts to cough." Now, they're the only ones that notice this because they're not there to talk.
Right.
They got bored, so they're watching. This had blown by all the partners in the law firm, all the big dogs that were at the table. And they went back and they looked at this particular deal point and they found out that they'd missed a huge area because they were so focused on what they had to say. And the other side's giving them these huge body language signals every time it comes up, but they're so intent on what they have to say, they're missing these signals, and the youngsters see it.
You actually said at some point in the book that being too smart is a negative for a negotiator.
Yeah, some people have a hard time with that. When you're really smart, you want to show off how smart you are.
Is that more of like a confidence and bluster thing, or is that really like you think you can outthink somebody, and so or maybe there's too much going on in your head?
Yeah, you're out thinking them, you're out analyzing them. You see negotiation as a chess match. The real problem with the idea that negotiation is a chess match, Herb Cohen way back when said negotiation is the use of information and power in a web of tension.
Yeah.
All right, so the web of tension is emotional tension, emotional intelligence. So the web of tension, imagine a chessboard where all the pieces are connected by springs, so that every time you move a piece, the tension on all the pieces changes. By the time you've moved 2 pieces, the entire board is starting to shift. A chess game is predicated on the fact that the pieces all stay in place until they're moved.
Yeah.
Which is not life.
Right. And in life, sometimes a pawn gets up and walks 3 spaces on its own.
Exactly.
Yeah. We need to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. And when we come back, I'm going to ask you about some magic tricks. So we'll be right back. With Text Expander, you don't have to waste time retyping things you've already worded perfectly. Instead, just use gathered snippets of information using simple keyboard shortcuts or custom abbreviations. You can capture the important pieces of your emails, directions, messages, and data as snippets so you never have to retype them again. From correcting your personal typos and defining industry terms to whole email templates, reusing your info has never been faster, and it works everywhere you type. Text Expander is available for Mac, Windows, iPhone, and iPad, and now Chrome too. Listeners can get 20% off their first year by visiting textexpander.com/podcast. How cool would it be to grow your practice in your chosen area of law without spending time or money on business development? Now you can with ARAG. ARAG is a leader in legal insurance, and it works a lot like medical insurance. When you become a provider on the ARAG network, you consult with and represent clients for various legal issues, from writing a will to dealing with bankruptcy or divorce. ARAG does the rest, seriously. They'll connect you with new clients, they'll pay you directly, they'll even collect client feedback and share it with you so you can keep growing your business. Visit araglegal.com/lawyerist, that's ARAG legal.com/lawyerist, to join the network for no fee and start growing your practice. And it is all about the growth. In fact, more than 90% of ARAG members say they are more likely to consult with an attorney when something goes up than if they didn't have legal insurance. Check it out at araglegal.com/lawyerist. That's ARAG legal.com/lawyerist. Support for today's episode comes from Ruby Receptionist, helping legal professionals like you deliver legendary service and grow your practice with live receptionist and chat services. At a fraction of the cost of a full-time hire, Ruby's live US-based team greets your clients personally when they call or visit your website. Ruby can route calls to you or connect chats to call based on your customized directions. Your live receptionist can collect new client intake, answer frequently asked questions, and make follow-up calls. Ruby streamlines billing with call tracking and Clio, Rocket Matter, and Clio Grow integrations. Ruby can send messages to you via the mobile app, email, or text, and much more, helping you grow your firm. Thousands of solo and small firm attorneys across the country rely on Ruby to turn callers and website visitors into clients. And now you can try Ruby for free. Call 844-715-7829 today or visit callruby.com/lawyeristpodcast to get started with your 14-day free trial. That's 844-715-7829 or callruby.com/lawyeristpodcast. So, Chris, we're back, and I feel like I didn't do this well enough at the beginning, but I want to warn listeners that early in your book, you explain that you are structuring the book with a foundation, that, you need to learn about 1 before you learn about 2, and 3 before you learn about 4. And having read the book, I get that. And we've kind of skipped ahead to the parts that I wanted to ask about the most, and we're going to do that again. And I just want to let listeners know that, I'm going to pump you for as much information as I can during this podcast, but this podcast is not going to replace a book. And I loved this book. Listeners, you should definitely go out and read it. Having said that, I want you to tell us about some of the magic tricks, the psychological hacks that work. And one of the ones that I found the most amusing is the idea of mirroring.
Yeah, that's the simplest one, and people are blown away that it works. I mean, a hostage negotiator's mirror is just repeating the last 1 to 3-ish words that someone has said. Now, when you get really good with mirroring, you can move it around and pick selected words. But it's nothing more complicated than that. Usually, it's with an upward inflection at the end, the last 3 words, something like that, or the last 3 words. It's a downward inflection.
You quote their words as if it were a question.
Yes, exactly. Your inflection indicates a question. It's very encouraging. It makes people keep talking. We talked a moment ago about smart negotiators. Actually, one of the smartest guys we ever trained, he loved to mirror. That's all he wanted to do. And he loved it because it was so invisible and so simple. It just made him feel so much smarter than other people. Before he'd go into negotiation with his deal team, he'd say, now you watch, I'm going to mirror the other side, and watch really closely, because they'll expand so much to each one of my mirrors, they'll reveal the truth of their positions.
I was tempted to say, they'll reveal the truth of their positions?
I probably would have bet on that too. I get that. I was doing a negotiation course in Dallas just the other day, and I was explaining mirrors, and one of the guys mirrored me, and I kept talking, and everybody started laughing.
I mean, I feel like if I did that, you would just tell me to shut up. But you explain this as it's kind of like when you're standing across from somebody and you cross your arms and they cross their arms at the same time, and then you put your hands in your pockets and they put their hands in their pockets. It's kind of the same thing, right?
Well, it's much more, but it's just with the words. I mean, and so this is not the body language mirror. Don't get the hostage.
But that's a similar thing, right? Or no? What it's doing in your heads.
I can't tell you for sure, because we don't even bother with that body language nonsense. I mean, because one of the problems with that body language mirror is everybody that wants to cheat us and not actually put work into the negotiation, that's what they study, because they think they're going to get their deal if they start mirroring your body language.
Yep. And the idea is that once you There are a couple, I mean, it feels like there are a couple aspects to them. One of them is that mirroring is a way of sort of syncing up with the other person. It's like, even whether or not you really are, you're sort of showing them that you're on the same wavelength as they are, and then they unconsciously start wanting to tell you more.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure that that's it, although this is one of the few things that we don't really have the neuroscience data on, because I use mirroring in place of what do you mean by that?
Gotcha.
I use it to get clarification and gain more information. One of the real problems with what did you mean by that as a question is most often, especially with an assertive type, and I'm a natural born assertive, if you ask me what did I mean by that, I'm going to repeat it again with the exact same words, only louder. Like if the person feels, it's like an American
like
in
my
Paris,
kids.
right? Yeah. If a person feels that their word choice is perfect, and you say, what did you mean by that? They're kind of offended that their words were so perfect and you didn't get it, and that's why they got to say it again.
Just pound it through your skull,
Pound it through your skull. But if I mirror it, there's something, the message you've sent is, all right, so I did hear your words, and unfortunately, please forgive me, but the words you chose are not adequate from my understanding. I'm going to need you to switch them. And people, instead of laying all that out, people just automatically change up their words and go back and try to explain the same thing, only a little more elaborately with different words.
And in a lot of the examples you give of this, in doing that, it sort of forces them to look at their words, and sometimes they change their minds just on the spot, because maybe when they try to explain it again, it doesn't make as much sense to them as it did the first time around.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing how if you get somebody's thought patterns out of their head and out of their mouth, it's the whole advantage as to why we all value sounding boards, because sometimes as soon as we start saying stuff out loud to a friend, we say to ourselves, now that I said it out loud, that doesn't make anywhere near as much sense as it made in my head. And that's another advantage of this whole approach. You get people to hear themselves.
I remember the example of one of your students, and her boss wanted her to make 2 paper copies of a file. And she says, 2 paper copies? And, or the client wants it, and just starts mirroring back to him. And eventually he gets to the point where he's like, nah, just, maybe we'll just wait and see if we need them later.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I wish I could add the script to repeat, but like, it was that kind of thing where you just keep showing them what they've said, and then it changes, and it does kind of feel like a magic trick. I'm going to experiment with my kids this weekend.
Oh, you're going to have a good time with it.
The very first example I think you give in the book is sitting down and just, it sounds like just such a pain in the ass that people might not even realize and so frustrating, but asking how and what, your calibrated questions. And it sounds like you can basically keep a negotiation going on for a really long time without ever actually saying anything by just asking how. And maybe you could give an example and then explain how that works.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the number one way to say no is, how am I supposed to do that? And, you got to say it gently, you got to say it softly, deferentially. And it's so powerful. I mean, some people, it's the very first story in the book, and some people, that's the only thing they ever learn. And then they start making such a huge difference in their deals. I'll get an email from them on LinkedIn saying, I should be on your staff. I'm just killing it now. I mean, that's how powerful it is.
It resonates with me as like going into a negotiation where, my client has given me $10,000 in authority and the other side demands $1 million. What do I say to that other than, how am I supposed to go back to my client and do that?
Yeah.
Where's that money going to come from?
Right. A little at a time. You let it out a little at a time. And the other thing it does is, like, even if they don't change their position, the thought process it causes in the other side, it makes them stop and think. And it makes them stop and at least, at a bare minimum, they take an assessment of your position, which is maybe exactly what you needed all along in order to open the door and expand the dialogue.
The answer that I would expect to that from a lawyer would be something along the lines of, I don't care how, that's what the number is. Does that just stonewall the negotiation at that point and you're like, okay, we'll come back later?
No, actually, you should keep asking it till they do say that. What a lot of people don't realize is, part of your job as a negotiator is to find out the limits of the deal.
Right.
So when they say, I don't care how, that's what the number is, you've done 2 things. You've actually found the limit, and you haven't blown the conversation up. Because how often can you find the other side's limit without having them slam their hands down on the table and storm out.
And I suppose the alternative is if what you're sort of telegraphing to them that I honestly don't know, or at least that's what you're saying. I don't know how I could possibly come up with that kind of money. And you're hopefully triggering them to start negotiating against themselves.
Yeah, or finding other alternatives. And you're very definitely, we call this letting out no a little at a time. Mm-hmm. It's far more effective to let no out a little at a time, because if you let it out abruptly, then the other side just doesn't appreciate it. It diminishes your ability to make a deal. Mm-hmm. But you started to telegraph the other side that no's coming. Winter is coming. No's coming. But let's try to get collaborative before I have to slam the door shut.
You talk about, so like, how am I supposed to do that is a really powerful question. What would that look like to you, or things like that is another thing to ask. But you say, don't ask why.
Why makes people defensive?
Yeah.
I mean, just globally, why always, and first of all, we don't always intend that someone's wrong whenever we ask why. But when we do think they're wrong, we always ask why. And people don't have to have that happen to them very many times before they expect that if somebody's asked them why, the person asking that thinks they're wrong. It's an accusation. You're doing something wrong.
I always say that to my kids, like, why do you keep leaving your socks all over the house? And my wife says, why do you even ask them that? You don't care what the answer is.
There you go. And what's she telling you when she asks you that?
She is absolutely being defensive on their behalf, and because I am accusing them of being stupid and frustrating me and all that kind of stuff. Yep.
Yeah. And actually, my son, who's my chief of operations, that's exactly his theory, that we started getting asked why questions by our parents when we were little.
Yep.
When they thought we were wrong, which is why it's a universal affliction. I mean, we found people to get ridiculously defensive extremely quickly by being asked why in every culture on the planet.
And I suppose if you're right that most people are irrational in their decision making, which I have no dispute with, we actually probably don't always know why. And you're asking me to rationalize something that wasn't completely rational. And I'm really good at rationalizing, but I might not be prepared to do it in that moment. And so I'm just going to get frustrated.
Right. And we're a little embarrassed and a little defensive because we're being accused, which then interferes in our ability to further come up with a legitimate explanation or even explore in our head what caused the action in the first place.
It's maybe it doesn't fall into the category of a magic trick, but you talk about number ranges, and it made me reconsider, because I've always been down on number ranges because I know we're going to end up at the low number in that range. But you actually call that a strength.
Well, it's a way to begin to get out of the bargaining process. I mean, you throw out a range. The other side is always going to drift towards the end that they want. Mm-hmm. And they're going to feel like they got something. Like if you throw out a number, the people automatically want to get you off that number. Like if you say, look, I'll take $17,000 for this. Then you're going to I'm going to offer you 15. But if you say, I want somewhere between 17 and 19.5 for this. And you think to yourself, ooh, so if I get it for 17, I got a deal here and I won. It's a way to give the other side a psychological win early on. So
if you're going to select a range, the high end should be shocking, and the low end should be essentially the maximum you're willing to accept.
Well, shocking, or just understand the other side is always going to pick the end of the range that favors them. Mm-hmm. And they're always going to feel like in grabbing that they've gotten a victory out of it.
Could you explain quickly what the Ackermann system for haggling is? Because it plays off the range idea.
All negotiations, if they get to the end, mm-hmm. they all end up breaking into three basic distinct phases. You can look back on them, you can see the dynamic. It's going to go in three phases. And the Ackermann system recognizes this three-phase dynamic. And then on top of that, it makes sure that, we have very specific numbers. If you want to end up at $100, the first thing you offer is 65. And then you go from 65 to 85. You go from 85. Let me see if I get the numbers right. You go 60. But the real issue is each one of your increases or each one of your moves has to be less, ideally half the size of the previous move.
Gotcha.
You have to go in decreasing increments. The other side feels that each inch is hard-won territory, and they feel the slowdown and they feel like they're forcing you to the end. I mean, I was involved in a negotiation in the Washington, D.C. waterfront There's a development that just finished there now on the Southwest waterfront. In the early stages of that, there was a negotiation between a yacht club that I was a member of and the developer. And we pushed the other side really, really hard. We actually pushed them to their limit, but their last move, they sweetened the pot by $1 million. And that was a big move. And it rattled the hell out of everybody on our side. And they said, oh my God, if they just made a move that big, there's got to be more there.
Right.
Now, I knew how we got there, and I knew that it was a stupid bargaining move on their part, and that they actually went to their limit. But the size of your moves will telegraph to the other side what they feel is going on. So your moves have to be in decreasing increments, because the human nature aspect of them will kick in, and they're like, we're really pushing them here, Last time they moved by $100,000, and this time they only moved by $13,500. So, my God, we're really pushing them to the end. Ignore human nature at your peril, and the Ackermann system takes advantage of the fact that humans are involved in bargaining.
And there's obviously more to it. In between moves, you ask calibrated questions. You try not to say no. You try to slow it down. And what if you recognize the other side is doing this? Because part of it is just a math problem. You're like, well, this was their offer. Then eventually they got here. Then, they're just doing the Ackermann system. Does that help you in your negotiation?
Well, and then it's a matter, if you're listening and you're really dialing into them, ideally you're not focused down on price anyway, because price is not going to make your deal. I mean, we don't use Ackermann when we bargain on our own behalf, because we know that price at best is an issue that is good or bad based on the rest of the terms. So, by and large, when we get into a price negotiation, we don't go back and forth. We pick a price that works for us based on the other terms. And actually, I'm going to want to give you a price that you think is a good price, but not an excessive one. I'm going to want you to be happy with the price. But if I underpay, you're not going to deliver because you're going to think you got cheated. If I overpay, you're going to change all your value system, and you're going to believe that you were entitled to that amount all along anyway. And I will feel like I should pay for bonuses, and you'll just feel like you were entitled to the amount. So we get away from the Ackermann system early on, and we focus much more on terms.
That's interesting. This is something you wrote the book, and there are lots of examples of negotiations in the book where it all works out and they're successful. You give a couple examples of failed negotiations, but having done so many, I'm wondering if you can extrapolate from that, like when a negotiation fails, what are the most common reasons it falls apart?
Well, yeah, interesting. Our definition of failure has changed.
Okay.
We don't want to make every deal. First of all, I'm going to diagnose, there's a saying in sales, and I think it applies to negotiations. It's not a sin to not get the deal. It's a sin to take a long time to not get the deal. And then we would add in that the only thing worse than no deal is a bad deal. We're going to figure out early on whether or not there's any kind of deal to be had, and figure out how long it's going to take us to get to either no deal or a bad deal. If it looks bad from the get-go, we're just going to pull out. We're not going to bother with it anymore.
I suppose, like in business, if you identify that early on, you go find another business partner to do the deal with. In hostage negotiation, that's where the snipers and the assault teams come into play.
Well, and interestingly enough, I mean, there's some deals, there's some kidnappings where they have no intention of ever letting the hostage go. Right. There is no deal to be had ever. And so you have to be able to diagnose that early on to understand what negotiation you're actually in.
And I suppose time there, it's really important to find that out early so that you can exercise other options.
Exactly.
You do talk about anger, though, and self-control as one thing that can really torpedo a deal or a negotiation.
Anger's a toxin. And, there's even in the business negotiation philosophy, there's something called strategic umbrage.
Yeah.
And they've demonstrated under academic conditions that selected use of strategic umbrage in simulated negotiations, they claim give you a better outcome.
And is that like offense? Like I'm offended that you would offer that paltry amount, or I'm offended that you would try to impose these terms?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
that would be it. And the problem is that's been demonstrated to be effective in academic situations.
How does that play out in real situations?
In real situations, anger is a toxin that just doesn't go away. And we all know the phrase, revenge is a dish best served cold. Well, if you use anger, you're setting people up to pay you back in spades on down the line.
So your advice is to just stay cool no matter what.
Anger just doesn't help. I mean, and I get angry occasionally. I mean, I hate being lied to, and I hate also when somebody's intentionally trying to cheat me. But if I get angry, there's a pretty good chance we're just going to withdraw from the negotiations.
Or hit pause, I assume.
Or
does it depend on why you got angry?
My team will hit pause and we'll talk about whether or not we want to make the deal. And there have been instances, we just terminated a relationship with a company that we did business with for several years because we didn't trust them, but the overall benefits in the time frame that we were doing the deal, they were highly beneficial to us. So I just stopped dealing with them because they always made me angry. And my son handled the negotiation.
I think you talked about labeling as one of the tools that you could use to stay cool or buy yourself time to stay cool or redirect what could become anger. And I think you use labeling as sort of, it seems like you think this, or it seems like this is what's going on.
Right.
And like with a counterfeit yes, you could say, it seems like you're saying yes, but there's something else going on there.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be a perfect way to test for counterfeit yes.
How's that different from, the therapists, when you do this, it makes me feel so-and-so?
Well, the thing that you just gave an example of is actually what's referred to as an I message, and it has 3 parts. And a therapist uses that, and we use that in business negotiation to engage in something called boundary setting. Like, it's amazing the number of business negotiations where the only thing the other side does is call names, yell at people, and make accusations. You wonder why, if that's the strategy they're meeting at all. But that's not unheard of. We were consulting with a client that had a counterpart on the other side. So the way to confront the behavior in the gentlest way possible is to say, look, when you call me names, I get frustrated because we're here to try to make a deal. You put a 3-part message in there to call the behavior out and then drop in, what are we here to do? What's the process? I thought we were here to make a deal. So that's an I message broken into parts.
Yeah.
And it's using the word I to focus at so it's not accusatory. I feel this is a problem. You might say, well, I don't think it's a problem. I didn't say you thought it was. I'm telling you, I think it's a problem. So there are different times when you gotta focus on yourself, usually in something called boundary setting, or you focus on them when you want them to feel heard. So there's a lot of context involved in what is your tactic and strategy at the moment.
There are so many more questions I want to ask you, but we've only got limited time. A lot of those questions you've addressed in the book. If people want to buy the book, and you should totally buy the book, the link will be in our show notes. Chris, you've got a convenient way for people to sign up for your newsletter, and I would like you to tell people about it in your late night radio DJ voice for people who've read the book.
All right, here we go. The very best way to sign up for the newsletter is to send a text message to the number 22828. The number again is 22828. And the message you send to that number is FBI empathy. All one word. Don't let your spell check put a space between FBI and empathy. Make it all one word.
Thank you for doing that. Chris Voss, thank you so much for being with us today. I really enjoyed the opportunity to just plaster you with questions. Thank you.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Make sure to catch next week's episode of the Lawyerist Podcast by subscribing to the show in your favorite podcast app. And please leave a rating to help other people find our show. You can find the notes for today's episode on lawyerist.com/podcast.
The Lawyerist Podcast is produced with help from Lindsay Calhoun and edited by Paul Fisher. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not endorsed by Legal Talk Network. Nothing said in this podcast is legal advice for you.